Hi everyone, my name's Rob from RobOps, and today we're going to be talking about MCP servers, a protocol that lets AI models like Claude actually control your tools instead of just talking about them. MCP stands for Model Context Protocol. At a high level, it's a standardized interface that lets AI models communicate with external tools and take real actions inside of them, not just generating text about them. Before MCP, if you asked Claude to help build a 3D scene in Blender, the best it could do was describe what you should do in the interface. With an MCP server running, Claude can actually open Blender, create objects, modify them, and hand off the results, all from the conversation. So why does this matter? The biggest reason is that AI stops being a co-pilot and starts being an agent. Instead of you copying and pasting Claude's output into your tool, Claude reaches into the tool directly. The second reason is that MCP is standardized. One protocol, many tools. The community has already built MCP servers for Blender, Godot, databases, browsers, file systems, and the list is growing very quickly. And third, it's composable. You can chain MCP servers together, which is exactly what we're going to do today, using Claude to drive both Blender and Godot in the same workflow. Now that we understand what MCP servers are, let's put them to work. Here's the pipeline we're going to build. We'll install two MCP servers, Godot MCP and Blender MCP. Godot is a lightweight game engine used to create 2D and 3D games and applications. Blender is a free and open source 3D creation suite that will allow us to create 3D models for our game. Then we'll use Claude to create a simple 3D asset directly inside Blender, export it, and finally use Godot MCP to create a scene and place that asset in it, all without leaving the conversation. We'll configure both servers through Claude Code, and both Blender and Godot will need to be running. The goal is simple: go from a blank canvas to a populated Godot scene using AI to drive every step. So to get started, we're going to hop over to our browser window. And so here's the Blender MCP repo we're going to be using. The setup instructions in this repository are quite good, and I'm going to be following those steps to get ourselves set up. So the first step is just going to clone the repository locally. All right, now I've hopped back to our code view and I have the Blender MCP repo open. Now, to get the Blender MCP set up, we're going to have to do two things. One, we're going to have to give Claude the instructions required to run the MCP server on our machine. The second aspect of it, we're going to have to create the bridge between our Claude instance and the Blender software. And so, of course, before we get started, you should have Blender installed. And once you do, we can start walking through these steps. And so I'm just in the README here. And if you scroll down, you'll see the prerequisites. You're going to need Python and you're going to need a package manager. They use UV. And so if you go UV help, or I guess just directly UV help, you'll see that we do have UV installed. If you don't, and you're on a Mac, you can use Brew. If you're on a Windows machine, you can basically PowerShell to download it directly. And the other thing is you're going to need to export some environment variables. This is going to tell the server when it's running what port to expose and where to find the actual running instance. And so if you scroll down here, these are the two environment variables. And if you're on a Mac, you just copy and paste these and export them just like that. And that will be your environment variables. Now, there's a bunch of different ways to do this, whether you're using Claude for desktop or if you're using the CLI itself. But effectively, what you need to do is install or define this JSON in your Claude settings. And what this JSON is going to do is going to say, we're running an MCP server specifically for Blender. Here's the command I want you to invoke, which is the UV command, which is the package manager we just installed. And the argument it's going to pass is Blender MCP. And so what this is going to do is just going to start running the MCP server on your machine when you tell Claude to use it or you enable the MCP server. And so similarly, you can go into your Claude settings, developer config, and you would just paste this in. If you had multiple MCP servers, you would obviously just copy the details for ours specifically. But if you're also using Claude, the CLI, you can simply run Claude MCP add and it will add the server for you. For me, if you navigate to in my .claude directory in the .mcp.json, you can see that I've copied that Blender JSON directly into my MCP servers, along with my Godot MCP, which we'll talk about later. So now that that step is completed, there's a bunch of different ways to do it if you're using Cursor or VS Code. There is one other important step, and this is why I cloned the repository. So it asks you to download the addon.py file from this repo. And so because we've cloned it, this is the add-on. You can see it's just a Python file. And you're going to open Blender. And then you're going to go to Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, Install, and select addon.py. And so we're going to switch over quickly to our Blender instance now. And so here we are in Blender. And in a very similar way, I'm going to go to Edit, and I'm going to go Preferences and Add-ons. I know you can't see this right now, so I'm going to just paste an image of what you could see. And you're going to see Blender MCP. And what you're going to want to do is just check that box. And once you've checked that box, you can exit out. And now if you press N on your keyboard, you'll notice this 3D side panel, and you'll see something called Blender MCP. And then you're going to click it. And then once you click it, you're going to say connect to MCP server. And once you do, you're going to say running on port 9876, which is the environment variable we exported. And so now we should be running the Blender MCP connection directly in our Claude session. So let's go test it out. So here I have a view where I have my Blender open and I have a fresh terminal window. And so I'm just going to create a Claude session. And here what I'm going to do is just say /MCP. And what I'm going to see is my Blender MCP is connected to my project. And I'm going to see a few other built-in MCPs. And so I'm going to just exit out of that. And what I'm going to do now is simply say, can you please create for me a red sphere? And what this is going to do is it's going to go through the bridge that we've set up, and it's going to create a sphere for us. And as you can see in Blender, we have a sphere populated, and we got some context back, which says a red sphere has been created. And I'm just going to say, it looks gray/white. Is there a reason it's not red? And so here we can actually interact with the application itself. And because I don't know Blender that well, it's very obvious that it did in fact make it red. However, based on how the view is currently set up, it's just appearing as a white object. And so as you can see, it took away or it updated the viewport settings, and now my sphere actually looks red. And so this is the power of MCPs. Before this, I would have had to have instructions relayed to me in terms of how I could click around the Blender UI to achieve the same result. And so now, as part of the experiment, we're going to create the asset that we're going to be importing into Godot. And so what I want to try to do is just create a very simple 3D humanoid model that we can import into a scene and control with arrow keys in Godot. And so to do that, I'm going to simply say, this is great. Now what I need is a simple humanoid object that I will later import into Godot. Please ensure it is a 3D figure that if I wanted to, could animate later. And those are the simple instructions, and what we'll see now is Claude take those instructions and translate them into Blender. And as you can see, Blender has started to create our asset, and it's actually also rigging it for us per our instruction that we might want to animate it later. And so there it is. It wired up a low poly figure in a T-pose, which is a typical pose for these 3D models that we could later animate. And so this is going to be the 3D asset that we won't animate in this video, but we are going to be using to import into Godot. So from the Blender side of things, our current task is complete. So now we are going to switch back to our browser, and we're going to look at the Godot MCP server. And so this is the Godot MCP server that I ended up testing out, and it worked quite well by Pete Thorne. And what I'm going to do is just clone this repo and pop back into our code repository and do a very similar following of the setup instructions. So going back into our code view here, I'm going to minimize the Blender MCP and I'm going to maximize the Godot. And so here, if I look at the README, there's a comprehensive set of instructions which involve just cloning this repository and running the server. And then in a similar way, adding the add-on to our Godot project. And so obviously first we need Godot installed. And so if you don't have Godot installed, please take some time to go and install it. All of these programs are open source and free, which was a criteria that I wanted to respect as part of this video so everybody could follow along. Now, the key part of this Godot MCP server is that it has this add-ons directory that has the Godot MCP server. So if you want to use this, you do need to copy this directory into your project, and this will ensure that the add-on does appear. However, the instructions and setup is quite simple. What we just need to do is cd into the server component, run an npm install, and then a run of the build. And this is what's going to bootstrap or start the server. And then we're going to go into Godot and we're going to enable the add-on, which is a requirement, and it'll be there because we have this directory here. And of course, we need to give Claude those instructions as well. And so in a very similar way, we need to add that JSON to our .mcp.json file. And so here, our server is Godot. The command is just going to run node, and it's going to be a path to the MCP server. And it's going to give you an environment variable for some of the output. And so that is going to be the steps we're going to walk through. I will just simply go cd server and npm install, and then npm build, and this is going to create the build. Now we're going to hop over to our .mcp.json and validate that we do in fact have the location of the MCP server configured. And as you'll notice, exactly as it's instructed, we have node, we have the absolute path to our index.js, and we have the environment variables for the MCP transport defined. So now what I'm going to do is open up this project in Godot. So now that we're in Godot, you simply have to go and click on project, project settings, and then plugins. And because we already have the add-on script, you should see the plugin and just make sure that it's on and close. And then what we're going to do is open up our terminal again, and we are going to then ask, or at the very least test the connection. And so can you give me details about the current scene? And what it's going to do is it's going to connect to our Godot instant, and it'll say no, Godot scene is currently open. That's why there aren't any details. You'll find an open scene first. And so we don't want to do that. We want to actually just create our own scene. And so what I'm going to ask it to do is, can you please create a simple 3D scene for me? I have an asset, a humanoid character that I want to place in the scene and eventually wire it up so I can walk around in the scene using my arrow keys. And so that's going to be our command, and we're going to see what it comes up with. And as you can see, it created a scene for us, and it actually wired up the controls as well. And we don't have our humanoid yet. And so before we actually add that, we're going to test that everything worked out okay, and then we're going to go back to the Blender control and ask it to import the assets that we just created, and then we're going to test everything end to end. And here we are back in Blender with our humanoid. And what I want to say in the session here is, hey, this looks great. Can you export it and optimize it for my Godot project? It can be found at Godot MCP. Please add this asset as I would like to import it as a playable character. And now what we can see is actually something pretty cool happening. And so in order to make sure we see that, I'm gonna hop back over to Godot, and we can see that the Godot MCP server now is picking up what we have added, and now it's updating our player code in Godot. And so now we can see our model is now in our game. And if I try to play, and if I go to my Godot MCP, I no longer have my blue cylinder, I have my model. And now I can walk around the screen and I can turn and do everything that I need to do. And I can even fall off. And so what we've done here is go from relatively zero knowledge of both Godot and GDScript and Blender and simple 3D modeling principles, and we were able to put together something pretty basic, but obviously in very little time. And what I found using these MCP servers in a lot of detail is they actually do really well if you're able to tackle things in small digestible chunks. We can clearly see that MCP servers are genuinely powerful, but there are a few things worth knowing before you build a workflow around them. First, MCP server qualities vary a lot. There are mostly community maintained projects, and the surface area of what each server supports is different. Blender MCP and Godot MCP cover the core operations well, but you will hit edges. And when you do, the fix is usually updating the server or working around an unsupported operation, not something Claude can solve for you natively. Second, the tool has to be running. MCP servers connect to a live instance of the application, so no Blender means no Blender MCP. Godot needs a project loaded. There's no headless or background mode here. That means MCP workflows are interactive by nature. You're driving a running tool, not automating a build pipeline. And third, chaining multiple MCP servers adds coordination overhead. Claude has to manage state across both tools, and if something goes wrong mid-pipeline, say you export a path that doesn't match what Godot expects, you'll need to debug hands-on yourself. What I found that helps here is I actually run the MCP servers in separate sessions. This allows me to paste the information over to the agents that need to know the information and exclude what they don't. This is of course a step below this orchestration workflow or this agent harness workflow that a lot of people are working towards these days, but it is something that allows me to stand in between as a quality control agent myself. And that's going to conclude today's video. I hope you enjoyed watching. I had a lot of fun making this. MCP servers really are an amazing extension of what LLMs can do today. And if you did find this helpful, please feel free to like and subscribe. And if you are interested in the project that I am working on, please comment below. I do think I'm going to make a video or a dev vlog of the project that I've been working on my own using these MCP servers in the next few weeks. As always, thanks and have a great week.